there it is. Thank you, American lady. And right, so comfy, beverages, fire safety equipment to hand, all that good jazz.
Everything's good to go.
All right, sweet. In that case, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to this edition of the Halcyon Show. My name is Lorne. I'm going to be your host. They say that actions speak louder than words, but that's a notion this man has chosen to defer. He's a poet and a director, a writer for both page and screen, and one of the most impactful and eloquent live performers I've ever seen. Never give up when you're torn. Life is short and more. The works of a man with a lot on his mind, to be sure. Someone whose work spans across genres and themes, while intricate on the surface is somehow even more nuanced than it seems. A man who never doubts that every word counts. One of my confessions, he's someone whose time I've been excited to anticipate. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the wonderful Liam Spencer AKA Annotate is here. Sir.
Wow, what an introduction that was. That was an awesome introduction, man. Thank you so much for taking the time to put that together, man. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'm glad to be here, man. It's been a while.
It has been a while.
You know, we've had conversations about putting this together for some time now. So yeah, happy to be here.
Although, and beautiful segue, by the way, the timing is apropos because you have something that you're releasing, and it would be wise, I think, to start there because it's the one thing that I've had very little to no exposure to, and I'd love you to just set the table for me. So you have an EP coming out, or releasing now, called Greener Pastures, and there's a deluxe edition right now available on your website. I'll put the link in the description for this interview below. Explain to me what you've got going on there. What is the concept? What is the execution? And what have you got for us?
Yeah, so Greener Pastures is literally 4 years of hard work, determination and passion is how I like to describe it, because when I became a poet, I've experienced a lot of things along the way that haven't always been, you know, nice, enjoyable, fun, to say the least. Some of the experiences have been difficult. Some of the experiences have been life-altering in a negative way. And I don't mean that they've been all related to the poetry scene and the poetry itself, but as in experiences along the way, as being, you know, my creative self and doing what I'm doing, putting out the work I put out. I've gone through some things along the way that have sort of shaped the artist I've become today and the type of creative I am now. So Greener Pastures is sort of like a look at all of that. It's like me putting together a piece of work that sort of encapsulates my experiences over the years and also gives people an idea of my motivations, my ambitions, my inspiration, and why I do what I do and why I sort of adhere to the principles that I adhere to. So it's almost like a hyper story in a way. It's like it's sort of like, obviously every piece is different, but I feel like they connect in some way to sort of tell a longer or more meatier story that people can really sink their teeth into. And it's also interesting to me because, like I said, I started recording it 4 years ago. So along the way, you can almost hear how much I've elevated, if you will, over that time, how I've improved and how my sort of cadence and the way I deliver has changed. And I think that's sort of also a beautiful thing to sort of see as well, or for better wording, listen to, if you're somebody that follows my work, because ideally, had things played out the way I wanted them to, this would have come out a long time ago. Greener Pastures would have been out a number of years ago, but I encountered some problems along the way, none of my own making. Won't go too much into detail about that, but those things sort of made me have to think on the fly and change things up. You know, there were tracks that were planned to be a part of it that I opted to leave out because I said, you know, these tracks, I feel like they're not going to work with the sort of story I'm trying to tell now, you know, because over time you grow, and with growth comes change and perspective that changes over time as well. And I wanted people to get the best idea of where I'm at now while also having an idea of how I got there. So I even had to omit some tracks and so on and so forth. But long story short, the EP is out now. It's the deluxe edition, as you described, where you get some bonus content, a track that's not going to be available when I release it in full. And so I'd love for people to check it out. You can grab it on my website, iamannotate.com. And yeah, it's wonderful to have it out there at last. I'll be honest with you, bro, because it's a labor of love, but it was also a really difficult experience simply because of the things I had to go through on the way. And maybe I'll get into that a bit later on if we continue to discuss this. But yeah, I'm just glad that people can listen to it now after all these years.
I'm keen to drill down into the creative process, because one of the things that that struck me from that answer, the 4-year process of, and you mentioned the elevation, you're changing as an artist, the honing, and this idea of you not changing the goalposts, but almost attaining something that when you started wouldn't have been possible with that current skill level. How do you look back from when you started to then through the eyes of when you started? Like, how would he look at you and what you've achieved now in terms of, like, would it even be cognizant to him? Like, I didn't know I was capable of producing something like this.
Yeah, definitely. I think that last sentence there summarizes it all, because I'll be honest with you, bro, looking back to where I started, I never thought I'd be where I am now in terms of the way I've come into a zone with my performance, with my delivery, with my cadence, my flow, all the way I've put these things together to become the poet I am now. And this extends not just to obviously the EP and delivering sort of soundscape material, but also to my performances on the stage as well. When I started out, I was very shy. I was very nervous. My first couple of performances, I'd literally have my phone in my hand, shaking like this the whole time. And to see where I am now and just, I'm thankful, but for lack of a better expression, I'm just really thankful and I'm grateful that I've been able to grow, and that I think I had the right type of inspiration around me as well when I was on the come up. You know what I'm saying? I had some really good friends, one of whom rather is such a good poet, that when I saw him perform, it changed the way I wanted to perform myself. Like I literally went back home and said, I can't perform with a phone in my hand. I can't perform without giving the audience my attention. I don't want to do this that way. I want to connect with the audience. I want them to really feel what I'm saying. I want it to resonate with everybody in attendance. And I knew that the only way for me to do that was to go back and hone my craft, to be willing to put in that time and not just say, oh, okay, because at the end of the day, bro, I genuinely think that we can all write, you know, we can all become a spoken word artist or a poet or whatever it may be that we want to do. But to become a master of your craft, you've got to put in time, you've got to put in effort. And it was me realizing that allowed me to start becoming Annotate, because at the start of my journey, I wasn't Annotate, you know, I was just going by Liam. And I had some decent pieces, don't get me wrong, but I feel like I was trying a bit too hard, like I was trying to be too fancy. So I'd have all these really big words, and just sometimes it was unnecessary. Do you know what I mean? And it might have been even overwhelming for my audience members. So even that was a learning process, realizing that you don't need to have big words to be a good poet. Do you know what I'm saying? It's about the content and what you put in there. That's what matters. And then even when you look at my wordplay now, it's been a topic of contention, or it's created some really interesting dialogue for me with other people, because I don't think that I employ wordplay without trying to look at a sort of, if for lack of a better expression, utilitarian way of putting it in there. So it makes sense, you know, it's not just there to be decorative. Do you know what I'm saying? But it's definitely been something that when I've had conversations with others, they'll be like, well, some people might say from a poetry standpoint that that's just fanciful language. I don't agree with that, but I see that perspective is different for everybody, and I appreciate everybody's opinion. You know what I'm saying? Like, I could then say, okay, if you look at sort of these academic places that sort of give awards, the award bodies for poetry, and that they don't appreciate the sort of poetry that I do. You know what I'm saying? They're not going to really consider it poetry. But then I might turn around and say, well, why isn't it poetry when it's such, all of this stuff, like even when you look at rap, obviously it's so deep rooted in that historically, you know, so why isn't the type of stuff that I do seen on that same level, just as something that's different, you know, because it's variety at the end of the day. It's all about sort of exploring the genre in a different way and being able to produce different types of work based on that writing skill and that writing level that we all have. So I personally, I appreciate all poetry. I appreciate the page poetry, I appreciate the performance poetry, I appreciate spoken word, rap. I love battle rap, as you know. So for me, it's just about, I kind of tried to amalgamate all of that, if you will, all of what I've been exposed to. I tried to put it into my poetry. I tried to sort of capture all of that inspiration in my work, so you can see, some people say to me, I can see the battle rap inspiration in there. And then other people say to me, I can see the spoken word inspiration in there. You know what I'm saying? But the best thing and a beautiful thing for me is, bro, is that I've had so many people say to me, what you do is uniquely you. And that for me has always been the goal, So for me to be here now and be able to have conversations with people, some of whom are the best poets I've been exposed to, say to me, you are uniquely you. There is nobody like you. Boy, honestly, bro, I would never have thought that guy back then would have looked at me now and thought that was a possibility. So definitely a beautiful thing to put into perspective and think about in retrospect, because I've come a long way, and I'm definitely grateful for that.
I want to talk to you about the amalgamation aspect in a moment, but I want to come back to something that you touched on that I think is worth highlighting for any artist, especially if they're used to the creative freedom of online content, right? You can just, whenever you get inspiration, a spark of inspiration, you can film it, record it, upload it, boom, it's in the world. With an EP or an album, there's a creative direction you are trying to uphold and manifest, right? And sometimes it's quite nebulous, and then trying to condense it all down. And then the problem becomes, oh no, I've got too much. Talk to me about the challenge of, because you've explored innumerable topics online, and I've seen you explore it in different ways as well, based on your videography and the way you've directed things, the way you've curated your work. And then to try and condense it into one thing that sort of, it's supposed to stand in its own work, but it's also supposed to be a representation of you. Talk to me about the challenge of that, considering how much you've done.
Yeah, I think that was difficult because I had to sort of come away from looking at all of the issues I normally talk about, and I'm used to sort of performing on and the topics that I normally explore, and sort of make it more about my story. But even in doing that, I still found ways to sort of reference some of the things that I think have an impact on me as an artist, on my mental health, on my creativity, even though they're exterior to my own personal circumstances. So for example, the situation in Palestine. So obviously seeing that and the sadness and the overwhelming and harrowing misery that brings forward when you witness these things. There's a track on my EP where I do briefly explore how that has an impact on mental health, because the track itself is about mental health, and it's about kind of looking at how, yes, we have our own sort of personal struggles, of course, and there's not a single person who doesn't, but for me personally, and I'm sure a lot of other people can attest to the same thing, seeing these atrocities happen do also impact my mental health. So it was interesting that I was able to sort of focus in on my own personal experiences, but I was still able to touch on some of the things that I have over the years without going into too much detail, because at the end of the day, I wanted, as I said to you earlier, to kind of make it like a hyper story, if you will. I wanted it to sort of have a beginning where people can kind of look at this sort of, not characterization, that's probably not the right word, because obviously it's genuinely me, everything I'm saying, but like when you listen to Fatality, which is the first track, and then you listen to Greener Pastures, what you hear in between that, you can definitely see that there's me acknowledging challenges and experiences that I've faced along the way, and how I've maintained the strength or maintained the composure to keep pursuing my goals despite setbacks, despite frustrations, and then also culminates with an acknowledgement of my ultimate goal, as I mentioned to you earlier on before we even started the podcast, and that is obviously reaching the hereafter and getting to paradise. So it covers that whole sort of ambition, where I look at worldly goals, but also looking at my goals that extend beyond this world into the hereafter.
Do you know what? I'm going to use this as an opportunity to ask you a question I was I was debating whether or not to ask you, I'll be honest with you, but seeing as we've kind of touched on one of the more troubling ongoing issues, and it is very much an ongoing issue with regards to Palestine and sort of the disruption in the Middle East, and then just kind of generally the discourse in the world right now being very volatile, and I would argue very... I can't quite find the word, but it feels like it's not the time for discourse as it was. My question to you was going to be, do you, and I had a cheeky way of asking it, so I apologize, I'll stick to my wording of my question, but do you miss the times when reviewing the mental health aspects of Joker was the most discontential thing you might pick to discuss in a week? Because it seems to me like when I watched that video as part of my prep, you just were approaching it as, you know, it's a taboo subject to people and da-da-da-da, you were breaking it down. It was actually quite civil. But you look at the year of 2024, and I wonder if you wish you didn't have quite so much inspiration to work with, because there just seems like so much someone like you can articulate and present in a way that all of us struggle to do so. But at the same time, it must be quite sad to have so much to look at and go, I could write something about that almost. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's actually a brilliant question, you know, bro, because interestingly enough, when I first started writing, all I wrote about was what's going on. So obviously we now see that it's even more prominent in the news, and it's almost like it can't be ignored, you know, in the way that it was perhaps being overlooked or under discussed before. That can't happen now with all what we've seen in the past year, right? But I've always written about this stuff, and when I first started out, that was my central focus. It was all about writing about oppression, writing about people that are suffering, and sort of bringing attention to these issues that I thought were being underrepresented in the media. Things that I thought needed to have a light shone on them, that people should be speaking about, that they maybe not or weren't even aware of. You know, because some people were ignorant. Unfortunately, they weren't necessarily exposed to what was going on, and not just in the Middle East, but, you know, in other places in the world too. So what I eventually decided, especially before I put the EP together, is that I didn't want to feel as though any fame, if you will, I don't like using the word fame because I don't consider myself famous, but it's the only word that's popping into my head right now. But people being aware of who I am, I didn't want it to come from me creating works based off of the suffering of others. It's such a deep thing, right? And it's so difficult because it's like, I definitely think it needs to be spoken about 110%. I don't think people should neglect it. And if you do have a platform, I sincerely hope that you're willing to speak out and acknowledge what's going on and sort of bring attention where you can to these atrocities. But I also think it's important to find a balance and understand that you shouldn't be trying to do what you're doing with hope of profiting off of the suffering of others. And that for me was a really contentious issue, and I ended up stopping for a long time writing about it, because not even because I felt I was doing that, because I wasn't, but I did notice that a lot of the sort of adulation I received came from those particular poems, and I wanted to step back from that and say, okay, can I sort of garner the same attention, the same adulation from other work without it being based on these issues that everybody's sort of talking about now? Because in truth, when I first started performing on the spoken word scene, nearly everybody was talking about oppression. So every event you went to, it was, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, because I'm not trying to undercut the works that people produce. In terms of writing, in terms of performance, it was all great. You know what I'm saying? There was never an issue with that, but everybody sounded the same because everybody was talking about the same thing. So for me, I started to come away from that and tried to find ways of blending it with my own work. As I mentioned earlier, like Descent into Madness is probably the best example, where I still acknowledge these issues, but I'm making it sort of more about how it affects me, as opposed to sort of looking at how I can maybe write these poems about people without truly understanding what they're going through. Do you know what I mean? Whereas that's what the focus was before. It was kind of writing about something that I don't understand properly, because thankfully, and I'm grateful, I've not had to experience it. So it's a really great question that you asked, because it feels like I've definitely spoken about that less. But I must also say that in recent times, I found myself inclined to doing so again, because of what I've seen, because of how important I think it is to use your platform for good. I definitely would like to create works that people can listen to and then go back and say, okay, I would like to be educated a bit more about this issue. You know, that for me is a wonderful thing for somebody. And I've had this before, and it's a beautiful experience. There's nothing like it, where I've written a piece and I've spoken about an issue, and somebody has come up to me afterwards and said to me, I really didn't look at it that way. Thank you for sharing that. And that to me, bro, I'll be honest with you, that beats somebody saying, oh, you're sick, bro, you absolutely killed it, any day of the week. Because the thing is, bro, like, don't get me wrong, I'm like anybody. I like the praise, man. Who doesn't? You know, I like when people enjoy my stuff. But I think what's more important is that I connect, you know, that my work resonates with people. So when I have somebody share that with me, it feels almost like, okay, job done. You know, that was what I was going for, and I've managed to achieve that. And then I just look, you know, I'd look to the heavens and I praise Allah, I praise God, I say thank you, because I've been given that opportunity to share something that is important and it's been understood. And there's nothing quite like that feeling, bro.
I am so happy you put it that way, because I'm very much like you in the way of, in recent times, my perspective and point of view on trying to have discourse is, I don't want you to agree with me. I just want to make sure you understand where I'm coming from, because the chances are then you won't demonize or villainize where I'm coming from. You'll just understand we disagree. I'm not coming after you. I'm trying to hold dear what I believe, and that's it. And when you put it through that prism, it's very rare for people not to be able to grasp it, unless, again, I'm not doing a good enough job at articulating it. And that's why I want to come back to you, because I think the reason you're able to do that is because you have a really delicate like, I can't really typify. I've tried over the last couple of weeks. I've tried to maybe say, oh, I see a lot of this person, or I see that person. But you're right. You have a unique way of grabbing people's attention, rewarding them for it, taking them on a little bit of a journey. They go deep into the rabbit hole with you lyrically and in terms of the composition. Then another, and it's so well paced, and I pop and I roll and I sit and I absorb. My question is, without getting too hyperbolic with the praise, my question is, where did your affinity with it start? Like, where was the genesis of you looking at someone or something and thinking, I'd quite like to try that, and not only that, I think I'd be quite good at it. Where did that start?
Oh, that, man, it's the reason I'm laughing is because I'll be honest with you, bro. When I first started, I didn't think I was gonna be good. I'll be honest with you. What happened is, I was very frustrated at a point in my life when I first became Muslim, and I was navigating this new path. It was completely alien to me at the time. I wanted to get used to being a Muslim, and there were definitely some experiences I had along the way that were frustrating. So, for example, before I met my wife, marriage was a difficult thing. You know what I'm saying? It felt like there were some issues there in some segments of the community, mainly cultural, by the way. I think it's very important to make that distinction, is that Islam teaches us to marry and to do so without any sort of looking at race and things like that, right? However, obviously, we're all human. So we don't necessarily follow things the way that we should when we adhere to, you know, our religious principles or whatever principles we have in life, right? Sometimes we end up going away from that. And so there were these cultural mindsets that I encountered along the way to do with marriage that were very frustrating. You know, there was some racism directed towards me, right? Because of my background. And I just got really frustrated, bro. I'll be honest with you. And I was just like, I'm fed up with this crap. Like, But I'm tired of writing statuses about it on Facebook. I'm tired of writing statuses about it on Twitter. Like, nobody's really gonna read them. Yeah, I get about 10 likes and maybe 3 or 4 comments if I'm lucky, but it's not really doing anything, is it? And I was like, I really want to get people talking. I want people to know that this is something that's wrong. Islam does not teach this mentality, and that we need to dispel these misconceptions, right? So I started writing first and foremost about marriage. And it was bloody terrible, bro. It was bloody awful. And I mean that because it was from a place of emotion. It wasn't from passion. What happened is I stumbled across some spoken word artists, one of named Muslim Bilal, who's also, he goes by Ashley Chin. So you might know him better as Ashley Chin. He's a director, he's an actor. He's an incredible creative talent. And I also stumbled upon the works of Sully Breaks. And I was like, okay, this doesn't look too complicated. I didn't think I could do rap at that time because I tried it in school and I was awful. You know, my friends used to take the mick out of me because I was so terrible. They were all rappers and they were all fantastic. And I was just, God, I think one of the bars I came up with was like, I'll knock you out and lick you around the head with your own shoe. And my boys took the mick out of me for weeks, bro. Like, they just took the mick out of me for weeks. And I was like, yeah, I'm not doing this. I can't do rap. So when I stumbled upon spoken word, I was like, okay, this looks a bit easier. It looks a bit simplified in comparison to rap, where they got the internal and the multisyllabics and all of that. I can just do, you know, the ABC stuff. You know what I'm saying? Keep it simple. So I started writing, and I just didn't have any real love for what I was doing. So yeah, people were talking, like they were hearing it and they were talking, but there was no passion there. Even when I was performing it, you could hear in my voice that there was no real passion. It was all from an emotional place. And eventually I actually opted to stop. So I said to myself, you know what, I'm not going to do this. And it's a funny story, bro, because whenever I tell anyone this, I genuinely do just think it was the right time and the right place type of situation where I got inspiration from Allah, and it just changed everything for me. And that was one day I was on my way home from work. It was February of, I think it was February of 2016, if I remember rightly. And I was on my way home from work. And this was after saying to everybody, look, I'm done with this poetry stuff. It's not working. I'm not very good at it. I'm not passionate about it. And I had this inspiration for a poem about my brother called Gratitude. And all that was going through my head is that I keep complaining. I'm frustrated about what's going on in my life right now. I'm not happy. But look at my brother. My brother's been through things that I can't even imagine in terms of how difficult they must have been. And he has never complained. And my faith teaches us that we should be grateful in every situation, because Allah's wisdom is infinite. We don't have that level of wisdom. So even in the difficult situations, even in those difficult tests, there's a wisdom there. And sometimes it's about understanding it from that perspective in order to be able to say, okay, that doesn't mean, by the way, I'm saying that somebody isn't entitled to feel sad when something bad happens. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that it's sort of about looking at things beyond just being like, okay, for example, something doesn't go your way. Oh, why didn't it go my way, man? Why is it always me? Why is life not the way I want it to be? There could be a greater wisdom for that. You know, for example, maybe you wanted to, let's just say, maybe you wanted to marry a certain girl and it didn't work out. Perhaps if you had married that girl, both you and her would have been at loggerheads, and then after a couple of months gotten a divorce. You know, just as an example, you don't know, right? So perhaps you were being saved from that difficult situation where there's going to be humiliation, there's going to be difficult. You got to face your family with that. After a couple of months, you've both turned around and said, okay, we can't do this anymore. You know what I'm saying? That's just an example, and it's a pretty poor example, but it's the first one that came to my head, right? But I looked at that and I thought, okay, my brother now is so grateful for everything that's gone in his life. He never complains. I want to write something about this. And I think it took me about 2 days to put together what was easily at that point, the best poem I'd ever written. No, it didn't have any incredible wordplay. It didn't have any amazing lyricism, but the content was exactly what it needed to be. And that changed the game for me, because it set me on the course and the path I'm on now, of trying to create meaningful work while also writing in a way that I enjoy. Because when I started writing, I did not enjoy it, which is weird, right? Because here I am trying to explore this medium, but I'm writing stuff without any love for it. It was a dispassionate experience. I hated it. Whereas when I wrote Gratitude, I was like, okay, I actually enjoy doing that. How can I continue to create works that I enjoy while speaking about things that are important to me? And that's where battle rap comes into it, because around that same time, I fell in love with battle rap. And I started watching American battle rap, UK battle rap. That's why, for me, it was an amazing thing when I got the chance to sit down and chop it up with Tony D on my podcast when I used to run the Outspoken podcast, because it was like, okay, here's somebody that I've looked at and has been an inspiration for me. And now I've got the chance to talk to him and, you know, just pick his mind, pick his brain about where he's at and what he's been through, his experiences and how he got to where he is now. And battle rap was a game changer for me, because the way these individuals write, for me, is superior to any other musical sort of art form, whatever you want to call it, whether it be rap, poetry, singing, whatever it is. For me, the best type of writing that you can find is in battle rap. Now, obviously, that's subjective. I'm not saying that take that and listen to me and accept it. No, I'm just saying, for me, I was so impressed with the penmanship of these individuals that I was like, that's what I strive for. Like, I'm not going to be a battle rapper. That wasn't my aim. My aim wasn't to be a battle rapper. Mainly because, if I'm honest with you, bro, I can't see myself being in an environment where I have to be so negative about somebody else, just on a personal level. And I also wouldn't want them to be so negative towards me. I don't like the idea of putting my family in the firing line either. So for me, those things stop me from becoming a battle rapper. Even though I've had many people, and I'm very grateful, I've had people like Scoot, Bizzo, Tony D tell me I should become one. And that means a lot to me. That means a lot to me, because it shows that they value what I'm able to do. And I'm very grateful for that. But it's not something I could do. But I've taken that inspiration and I've somehow tried to amalgamate that into my own craft and what I do. And that's why I love wordplay. Because what I've done is I've challenged myself. I've said, look, people look at wordplay to a large degree, especially if they're not exposed to battle rap. Because if you're exposed to battle rap, you will not look at wordplay as decorative. Because wordplay is so much deeper than that in the battle rap world, yeah? So for me, it was about, how can I take this wordplay, put it into my poetry, still be a performance poet, and show people that wordplay can be more than just decoration. Because a lot of the wordplay you hear in sort of the poetry world, some might argue sounds like decoration. Yeah, some might argue that. Some might even argue that about my work, and they're entitled to do that. I would disagree, but they're entitled to do that. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. But what I've tried to do is find a way to use that wordplay to create meaning and show people how these deep topics, you can still use wordplay to create meaning. You know what I'm saying? So, like, for example, one of the explanations I gave somebody who asked me once why I use wordplay is that I want to reach a greater audience. So if I'm doing, for example, a piece about people suffering, right? And that whole piece is just me talking about the sadness and the harrowing nature of that situation, and really laying it on thick, there's a potential I might lose some of the audience, right? Because some people just simply won't be able to digest it. So I add wordplay into a lot of what I do, because I'm trying to find a way to make the source material a bit more relatable without taking away from the subject matter, if that makes sense. And it's a very challenging thing to do, but I love that, because it's what's kept me on my toes. It's allowed me to avoid complacency over the years and become a better writer. That's how I went from being the guy that could only basically do ABC rhymes, if you will, to being able to do what I do now, where I can do the internals, the multisyllabics if I want to. I can incorporate the wordplay, all of that stuff. And I can also engage the audience with performance, because I decided to challenge myself along the way. And that for me is the most important thing. And it's the biggest advice I'd give to any writer, is that you've got to find a way to challenge yourself. Because if you're not challenging yourself, then yeah, you might stay good, but you're probably not going to be great. And for me, I've always, in everything I do, I strive to be great. I strive to be great. And again, whether that's something that everybody believes or only a segment of people believe, that's absolutely fine. As long as I know that in what I'm doing, I'm striving for that greatness, then I'm content. Because that's my aim. I want to be as good as I can possibly be, because I've been blessed with a talent. How can I take a gift that I've been blessed with and not give it its due? You know what I'm saying? So it's about giving it its due. It's about trying to find a way to do what I do in the best possible fashion, and also send, or spread rather, a positive message or an important message, one that people can connect to and look back at afterwards and say, okay, that got me thinking, man. That's something maybe I should look into, or that's something I should start researching or talking to people about. You know, like any of those types of responses to that type of work that I create is something that I see as a positive thing.
I want to bring it back to, because you mentioned Tony D. The thing that stood out in my interview with him, and I was on the phone with him for 7 hours. God bless you, Tony.
Wow.
I know, right? He is too nice a man. But the thing that struck me the most, right, is I asked him about his legacy. And Tony D's got an immaculate legacy within battle rap, within poetry, within music. He said, I hope I helped. And I remember thinking, like, whoa, man. Like, to sing to all that. But then it got me thinking, right? Because our journeys are actually kind of parallel. I started YouTubing around June or July of 2016, and looking back on what I've done, 2016 me would have been like, you did that? Crap. Damn, I can't wait to get started. And the reason I'm mentioning all this is because I want to preface the next question by reading a blurb from your website, if I may, which is, since 2016, Annotate has written for and performed on some of the biggest stages and broadcasts in the country. His cutting-edge poetry has earned the critical acclaim as both a performer and visual storyteller. I've seen him headline TNT Sports' first ever spoken word show, Sport in Words, and then you go on to raise some more accolades and things of that nature. My question is, having been on the journey you've been on, and you've got that there on your website as facts. This isn't hyperbole. This is you just stating what happened. Does it feel like you've achieved that? Or do you still feel like you're still kind of in that, I'm just doing it because I feel like doing it fate? Like, you know what I mean? Like that feeling of, I still feel like I'm finding my way. I'm still creating what I'm creating. It's not a thing that I'm now pushing and doing. Like, I don't know how quite to articulate it, but even now, I don't feel like I'm an established podcaster, but I've done 100 of these, you know? So yeah. How do you feel when you look back on 8 years of doing what you've been doing?
Yes, again, it's interesting because if you ask me to sort of summarize who I am as an artist, I don't even consider myself a poet, really. If anything, I suppose people look at me as a bit of a hybrid because of the way I will mesh performance poetry with battle rap sort of inspiration and put the two together and blend them in a way that allows me to still incorporate that spoken wordy type of poetry as well. So it's interesting because it's very hard to say, okay, like I've made it as the poet that I want to be, because I still feel like there's things I'd like to achieve. You know, there are many things, in fact, you know, that I'd like to achieve. And it's just about raising the bar for myself year after year. What can I do next to sort of elevate and get to that next step or that next phase in my poetry career, if you will, that's going to take me to a new level, a completely new level where I've not been before. because I've done some incredible things, no doubt, but there are still some things I'd love to achieve that would, I think, be a full circle moment for me, you know. And one of those things I think would be to do like a stadium show. You know what I mean? That's something that I think most of us poets aim for and strive for, you know, because it's not really something that's common. You know, you don't really see that from poets. So that's something I'd love to do one day. I'd love to be able to do a stadium show, you know what I'm saying? So that for me would be like the mother of all achievements, you know what I mean? Like, but for the time being, yeah, bro, similar to yourself, it's just, I'm just kind of looking at it and appreciating the journey. I just want to keep growing. I just want to get better and better with every year. I want to achieve more accolades. And one thing I will say, I had this conversation with George as well, who's also a battle rapper, or was a battle rapper. And we were talking, and I was saying to him that I'd love to see more appreciation for the type of poetry I do. And I don't mean from people that listen to it or people that have supported me over the years. Those people definitely show me that level of support. I'm talking about from award bodies. I'd love for there to be sort of an award body that sort of looks at the poetry that people like myself do and say, okay, this is something that is an achievement. This is something that should be rewarded. Not because I need that, by the way. I don't need that to feel as though I'm doing a good job. But it can be, as an artist, it's a little bit frustrating to kind of look and see that the award bodies only seem to exist for certain types of poets. Do you know what I mean? Like primarily page poets. There's a lot of reward involved if you're a page poet, and deservedly so. Page poetry is a beautiful thing. It's something that is its own challenge. You know, it's completely different to what I do, and I appreciate and respect and admire that. It's not something that, I mean, I can do it, but it's not something that I would do sort of regularly the way that I do my own thing, because this is the type of poet I am. So I'd love to one day see sort of an award body that looks at this type of poetry, you know, the more performance-based poetry that incorporates this type of lyricism, the wordplay, and says, okay, there's an award for this, you know? You guys are doing something really sick. And by the way, I'm not just talking about for me, because there's a lot of poets that have similar approaches to myself that are more performative, you know, or poets that use a lot of wordplay, or poets that use a lot of lyricism that wouldn't necessarily be considered for an award if they were to enter into a typical page poetry type competition. You know what I'm saying? And I think it's almost, I don't know if belittling is the right word, but it almost suggests that that work isn't as good, which I take issue with, because not only is it subjective at the end of the day, but there is creativity and talent being shown in both forms of writing, in both forms of poetry. Do you know what I'm saying? So that's definitely something I'd like to see change. I do think there's been a couple of initiatives that have tried to do that. Wordplay and Flow is an initiative I know that I've been looking at different types of poetry and trying to award for that in recent years. And hopefully that will grow. You know, hopefully they'll be able to grow and get bigger so that more people are aware of what they're doing and what they're trying to achieve. But I'd love to see that on a greater scale. You know, I'd love to see some of these other bigger award bodies looking at different types of poets. And
I want to touch on something, and I want to see if I can get you to opine on something, if I may. Feel free to leave it if you want to, but it's something I've been wrestling with battle rap for a while, and I wonder if it's the same with spoken word and poetry to a certain degree, because I see it as entertainment. I see the intricacy, I see the sheer effort put into these bodies of work, and I can't help but be impressed and entertained, because every time I hear something new, a new slant on something, a new take, a new way of proposing an idea, I fucking love that. It's like nectar to me, right? But to a lot of people, I would suspect that they see it as more of an intellectual exercise rather than entertainment per se, because it is challenging them. It's asking them to come along for a ride, pay attention. I'm not going to spoon feed you this. I'm going to make it as delectable as I possibly can, and I'm going to work on it so it's as succinct and as slick and as artistically relevant and as easy to digest as possible. But I am asking you to come on a journey with me, and I'm asking you to test yourself a little bit. Here's my question. Do you think then that the boundary to entry with that can be brought down with time? Or do you think there are ways of ingratiating the audience at different levels into what you do, so that when you do what you do, there is more of an appreciation for it? There is more scope to be able to explore ideas to a wider audience without them being turned on by the intricacy, by the subject matter. It's more about the fact that they trust in the quality of your work and your character as a person.
Yeah. I mean, it's another thing that I've sort of discussed over the years with some of my closest friends, is that they've often said to me, like, if you want to reach everybody, then you would have to perhaps look at toning down what you do. And I even addressed this in one of my tracks, actually, on the EP called Next Level. It's a bonus track, so you should definitely get the deluxe edition of the EP.
Here's the hard sell, ladies and gentlemen. Get the deluxe so you know what the hell we're talking about here. Go, my friend, go.
But yeah, it definitely is something that we've discussed. I can't see myself completely deviating from the way I currently produce work. But I definitely think over the years I've become more open to delivering different types of work. So sometimes I will write the more wordplay-esque, the more lyrical stuff, and perform it in some settings, like a flow vortex, for example, where the crowd absolutely comes unglued for wordplay. My goodness, that place loves wordplay. And then comparing that to going into a different place where maybe the environment it's a lot more subdued, you know, in terms of the atmospheric reactions and whatnot. Maybe there it's going to be more of a performance piece, you know, something where I'm telling more of a story. So I definitely think it's enlightened me over the years in that regard, where it's kind of opened my mind to how I can explore this medium in different ways in front of different types of people without necessarily completely changing who I am, because I don't want to tone it down to the extent that it changes the type of poet I am. Because I call myself Annotate for a reason, and I feel like, you know, I'm not a bad speaker at all, thankfully, but I definitely enjoy articulating myself more through my work than traditional speech, just because I feel like it's easier to reach more people that way. So I wouldn't want to change myself to the extent that I'm almost unrecognizable. And that's kind of the answer I've always given to my friends, is that I get you, I agree with you, sometimes that is needed. But at this stage where I'm at now, if I do that, then am I being disingenuous? You know, am I being a bit dishonest with myself? Because I can still write that type of stuff as well. It's not like there's anything to say I can't be who I am and not sometimes change it up. But to come away from who I am entirely, perhaps because I can get more fans, if you will, then that's not a motivation for me at all, because my motivations I believe are greater than that. And one of the main motivations I have is to spread significant messages, things that people can hold on to after they've listened and actually think about beyond the performance. And recently I wrote a piece about my dad, who passed away in 2018. And when I performed it, that was the type of response I had. You know, people came up to me and they said, I really, really felt that piece. and then they told me why. And these are the type of responses, the type of discussions I want to have after my poetry. I don't want it to just simply be, you're sick, because I genuinely believe that that is the easiest thing for most of us to achieve, is trying to get people to say that we're sick, because all of us are going to have somebody believe that we're sick, right? Of course, it's going to vary from person to person. Some people are going to have it to a great degree, and others to a much smaller degree, but there's always going to be somebody that thinks that you're sick. So for me, that shouldn't be your focus, because if that's your focus, then you've got in my opinion, you've got a low ceiling. And even if you achieve well from a sort of like a fame perspective or a monetary perspective, what impact have you had? That's what I go back to, and that's what I look at. What type of impact have you had? Do you want to just be remembered as someone who had some sick bars and people nodded to it in their headphones, or do you want to be someone that years down the line people are talking about because you shared something with them that was absolutely profound, that was unforgettable, that was a performance that they've taken with them and they've never been able to let go of? And for me, it's the latter, 100%. And that's what keeps me going and motivated on the sort of trajectory that I'm on, and the path that I'm on, and the way that I write, the way that I intend to do what I'm doing, and the type of work that I create.
I think that's why you see a lot of extremely famous people, for one thing, get very frustrated when they get pegged into the thing that they do, because ultimately they sacrifice a lot of themselves to get famous. And then the frustration comes when they go, well, I want to be myself. And they realize the people that follow them, yeah, but I don't follow you for you. I follow you for what you do that spoke to me. And I want you to just keep doing that, because fans are selfish in the wills and the wants, and they don't have any obligation to follow you because you've done something for them. Their only obligation is to follow what they like, and that creates a very odd dichotomy in performers, which is why when you talk about not wanting to disassociate what you do now from what might be, and it's a big might, is so poignant, because it speaks to this idea of getting good at what you do, and that being the thing that ultimately sells what you do, rather than it being, yeah, but I do something that lots of people just glomp onto. It's not a satisfying cycle. But one of the things I wanted to ask that maybe helps with that is the fact that I've noticed that you've been quite a proponent of utilizing different social media techniques. You've also utilized the different content types, like shorts, like the skits, like longer form content, like podcasts. You're obviously a live performer, so you're not adverse to being able there in person to reach people. Talk to me about that, maybe mitigating that. Do you find that you're able to use those different types of content creation archetypes, if you will, to be able to maybe say the same thing, but say it in a slightly different way, say it in a more succinct way, in a more verbose way? Does that help at all?
Yeah, I think with obviously things like shorts, we all know that we have short attention spans, right? That's why things like shorts exist. At one point, we even had Vine, which was, I think, like 12-second videos or whatever, right? So it's about understanding that we're living in a time where people don't necessarily always want to hear long form content. So I think things like shorts provide that opportunity for us to say things, important things, in a very succinct, as you described very well, way that is more likely to capture the attention of people that are not exposed to what we do already. And I've actually been sort of learning more about that in recent times as well. I've been trying to appreciate that more, because I've noticed some things that I talk about will have a greater reception with people that don't necessarily follow my content than others. So for example, there might be something that the poetry crowd, or the poetry world rather, will go wild for, but that won't necessarily be the same for people that don't listen to poetry regularly. So for you to be able to reach an audience that extends beyond your normal audience that you're used to being in front of, you need to be able to change it up a bit anyway, you know, which kind of goes back to what we said before. So it's about sort of being adaptive without necessarily removing the essence of who you are. And I think I'm trying to explore ways to do that as much as possible now with my content, because obviously, naturally, I don't just want to reach my audience. I want to reach people that don't normally listen to poetry as well, and see how I can potentially impact them. And I've noticed that the more relatable you make that content, the more likely you're going to reach those types of people. Do you know what I'm saying? Because there's also going to be a lot of people that don't necessarily listen to poetry. And they might even have a sort of idea of poetry that is very, I can't think of the right word right now, but
I mean, I'm struggling to think of a representation of a poet in modern times that wasn't in some way a denigration of the art form. It's it's the punchline in comedies. It's what do you do in your spare time? I write poetry, and you go, so you're a bit, and it's like, okay, but that seems like an odd way of, especially when they have no concept of what it actually is and what it entails and who does it and to what purpose.
Yeah, exactly. You hit the nail on the head, bro. Couldn't have said it better myself. And I think because of that issue, it makes it difficult to capture the attention of people that don't normally listen. So you've got to find creative ways to do that. And Reels, YouTube Shorts, they provide the scope for that. So it's definitely enabled me to become a more open-minded writer in that sense, where I've kind of looked at ways, like I've even written some trendier stuff, you know, that this at one point when I first started, I'd never do that. In truth, it was something that I was completely against. But I've come to understand that sometimes having a bit of fun with what you do is also nice, you know, like you don't always have to be serious. So I've written a couple of poems, like I've written about X-Men 97, I've written about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mutant Mayhem. You know, I've had some fun with it from time to time, just trying to capture the attention of people that might be scrolling by and be like, oh, okay, yeah, I've seen that film, I like that. I'll never forget, I had one guy who stopped on one of my videos because he saw my graphic novel collection and was like, I don't know what you're saying with the wordplay, but anybody who's got a collection like that gets my respect. And I was like, you know, well, do you see what I'm saying? So obviously it's just about sort of exploring different ways to be a creative poet, man, and delivering not just a message. Obviously we've touched on that throughout this conversation. Obviously that's my main goal, but I also want to have fun with it. I want people to look at my content and enjoy it. And sometimes it's nice to have somebody I'm not used to seeing a response from just drop a comment like that, because then I'm like, okay, it's reached somebody new today, somebody that's not used to listening to what I do, and they've listened until the end. They've not even just, you know, scrolled by it after a couple of words. They've actually sat and listened to what I've had to say, and I appreciate and I respect that.
I look at views in the modern era as the digital equivalent of having like a stall in a market square, and you're trying to hand out flyers, and people take a flyer, but then they put it immediately in the bin. There's something about, I appreciate you stopping by, and I appreciate you pretending to look at the flyer, but it breaks my heart a little bit that you didn't leave a like or a comment or shared it, because it tells me that it didn't resonate with you, and I would be really happy to find out why, but that's an existential crisis of a creator for another time. I have an impossible question for you to answer next, though. I have two more questions, but I'll give the impossible one first because I'll need you to wrestle with it. What makes a good poem?
Oh, that is an impossible question.
What is an impossible question, but I need to ask, because it's imperative to sometimes get the take of, because I have my ideas of what makes a good podcast, a good battle rap, a good wrestling match, a good movie, cartoon, narrative idea, but it's just subjective, and I'm also not an expert. We have an expert on the show, so I have to ask, in the eyes of an expert and someone that's aspiring to make good poems, but also ideally, in your mind, the perfect poem, what is that? How does one approach making that?
I think first and foremost, and it's going to sound cliche, but it's finding something meaningful to talk about. That for me is the difference between a poem that might sound good on the surface but doesn't offer me much, and a poem that might sound good on the surface but also gives me something to think about. That for me is the difference between a good poem and not a bad poem, because it's still going to be subjective, but a poem that I'm probably not going to remember. And for me now, it's very common to go into like spoken word venues or poetry venues and listen to poets that are incredible writers. It's not uncommon to hear some incredible work from different types of people. But what isn't necessarily as common is hearing work that really, really stays with you. So for me, the poets that I believe, or the poems that I believe stand out, are the ones that after I've heard it, I think about. And I don't necessarily mean because I think about it because it's something that means something to me, but I think about it because that person has struck a chord with me in some way, even if I don't necessarily agree with what they have to say. But they delivered that message in a way that is unique to them. And that's why it's been profound to me. Like, I heard a poem recently, and I've heard it multiple times now, from an incredible poet who's one of my favorite poets. His name's Just Ori. He's an incredibly gifted writer. And his poem is called 2098. And in this poem, he addresses how things might look in 2098 if nothing changes with the current situation. And he also addresses things like the atrocities in the Middle East. But the way he does so is so profound that the poem has not left me. Do you know what I'm saying? So that for me is a sort of representation of what makes a good poem. And it's not just because it was about, because obviously it's gonna hit you if it's about Palestine, especially in today's time, right? But it wasn't that. It's the way he delivered the message. It wasn't just him saying this is what's going on. He created this narrative where he was talking about how things can be in what, 70 years from now, 70 odd years from now, if we don't change, if things don't change, this is how things might look. And I just found that incredibly creative. And that's the type of poetry that really resonates with me, because that's how I like to write. I don't like to write stuff that's just me spitting bars and people saying it's sick. I really want it to be creative. And one of the pieces I wrote recently is actually called Torn. And in that one piece, I explore 3 different mentalities, 3 different mindsets. So I go from sort of like a euphoric mindset where you're happy, jubilant, things are going really well, to anger, where things are not necessarily going the way you want them to, you don't understand why, to sadness and depression, because you've gone from that really, really high feeling to feeling completely low. And I did that in a single narrative. And that for me is the type of content I try to create, because I want it to be unique. I could have said the same thing, just spitting bars and saying it in one sort of approach, without being performative, without adding the different mindsets, without adding the different mannerisms and stuff. But for me, it was like, how can I create a piece of poetry that addresses these issues and these feelings that might actually stay with people when they leave here today? They might actually remember it for being a bit more than just a straightforward poem with me saying, oh, I'm fed up of things not going my way. You know, how can I make it a bit deeper than that, a bit meatier, something people can really sink their teeth into? And that's what I do with every bit of poetry I write. You know, like, I really want it to be creative. So for me, bro, if I had to say, to summarize, because I've been going on quite a while because I get really passionate about this, is it should be a poem that is good, is one that, I'm not saying it should stay with you in the sense that you remember every word. No, that's not what I mean. But it should stay with you in the sense that you remember, okay, that poem from that person is one that was sick. And even though I don't remember everything about it, I remember hearing it on that day because it stuck with me due to how profound it was, due to how impactful it was. So it's all about having an impact, bro. And it's the same with like battle rap. For example, off the top of my head, Lorne I and Av has not left my head since I've seen it. Do I remember every bar said? Of course I don't. But it had such a profound impact on me because the lyricism they displayed was some of the greatest writing I've seen in battle rap. And it stayed with me ever since. And that's the kind of impact I want to have with my poetry. I want it to stay with people so that when they see me next time, they're like, you're that guy I saw last time when I came here a couple of months back and, you know, you did that poem and it was sick, bro. And I've had that, bro. I've had that a few times. I've had people come up to me and say, you know, oh, bro, you might not remember me, but, you know, I saw you at this show a few weeks back. I remember I was at work once and a guy came, he was at one of the performances I did and he said to me, yeah, I remember you, bro. I remember you killed it that night. And I wasn't really into poetry, but like I came away feeling a bit different about it because what you did was different to what I'm used to. And the same thing happened. I did a night at So Far Sounds it was actually a year ago. And there was an American lady in the crowd who turned to my friend and said, I've never heard spoken word like this before. And that for me is it, bro. It's that type of impact where somebody will go away thinking about what you've achieved on that night. That for me makes a great poem.
And the final question I have, it kind of tacks on to that, which is you've touched on a number of different aspects of what you do and how you would go about doing it to execute it perfectly or as nearest to perfect as you can manage. The question I have is there anything that you have yet to talk about that you really want to? Because one of the rules I have with my guests is I love having a jump off. I don't just want to, kind of what you're alluding to, I don't want to have a guest just because I know they've got X amount of followers and therefore it's likely to result in X amount of exposure. I want to have something to talk to that guest about specifically that I really want to drill down into. And in your case, it is the fact that you wrestle with a genre that attempts to be profound through an entertaining medium, but also attempts to inject a lot of intellectualism, a lot of morality, but also attempts to balance that line between, look, I'm just presenting my opinion. I'm not trying to make necessarily an advocation for what I'm believing. I just want to express myself, right? The question I have then is there anything you've yet to really find a jump off for? Anything that you've got in your head that, like, fuck, I'd really be just so love to talk about this. But the way I do things right now and what I've done, it doesn't lend itself to that yet. Is there anything that springs to mind?
So I think it's a bit harder to sort of pinpoint a topic, but a way of writing, definitely. I would love to approach things a little bit more comically at some point. But I feel like you just said, it doesn't really lend itself to what I currently do. And I don't want to become so sort of entrenched in that I come away from what I'm trying to do, if that makes sense. So like, I wouldn't want it to sort of divert me from this path I'm on and the messages that I'm trying to spread, or the things that I'm trying to for example, misconceptions that I might be trying to dispel, by becoming seen as somebody that's more of a comedy act. Because I would love to do some more comical type stuff down the line. You know, I'd love to explore, you know, topics that are just strange or eccentric or weird or just quirky, you know, like things that the people just will have a laugh about. Like they would look and be like, oh, okay, Annotate, I didn't even know you did stuff like that. You know, so I'd definitely love to do that at some point. But it's about trying to find a way to do that without it sort of changing the expectation from people. I wouldn't want it to be a case of I did that and then people came to know me for that and kind of expected that, oh, okay, Annotate's this guy now, he's going to be doing this type of stuff. That's always kind of been my concern, isn't it? Because it's like, even from a sort of video perspective, I've been considered by quite a lot of the people I know as a funny guy, which people might not know about necessarily too much at the moment. But that's because I've also not wanted to kind of be known for being a funny guy. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I don't want people to know me for being a funny guy. Not because there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but because I feel like it will potentially take away from what I'm trying to achieve with the more important things that I'm trying to do. So for me, if I'm able to strike a balance, which I'm trying to do at the moment, I've actually started exploring a more funny side of myself. I've been doing some skits for a burger joint called Big T's. Incredible burgers, by the way, man. It's in it's not too far from Chancery Lane, and it's, oh my goodness, the food's incredible. Food's incredible. But I digress on that. But I've been exploring ways to be funny doing these skits, and it's been a whole lot of fun, because people have often said to me that they think I have a theatre background, which I don't, but they can see the sort of acting inspiration incorporated into my work. So I'm like, you know, I want to do a bit more of that. How can I do that? And I've been exploring that, and I've been doing these funny skits, and I feel like maybe it might be time, bro, to like start doing some funny things and exploring, you know, some other avenues in that regard. So while there's not necessarily a topic, there has for a long time been a sort of way of writing that I've avoided. And that is kind of being a bit more funny, a bit more comical, a bit more lighthearted. But I've finally come to a time now where I think I might just do that. Now, like I said, it wouldn't be a permanent change or anything like that. It wouldn't be me coming away from who I am or what I do to do that from now on. But I'd love to sometimes just throw that in there from time to time, let people hear a completely different side of my work. Because I also don't like the idea of people thinking that maybe I only do one type of work, which is why when I do write my stuff, I try to make performance pieces. I try to make spoken word type pieces. I try to make the more battle rap inspired pieces. I try to, even from time to time, believe it or not, because people haven't heard much of it, I've written some page poetry type pieces. So yeah, one day, bro. One day, man.
I have to ask, because I mean the thought of it's the opposite almost in this instance, but Marlowe, he directed a movie that I think played off of his comedic tendencies, but was ultimately a horror movie, or at least a suspenseful thriller movie. And the thing I pulled away from that is that he played off of the anticipation of him as a performer, as a writer prior, to turn it against the audience's expectations almost. Is there a way you could explore that maybe? This idea that people are looking at you at the moment and saying profound, intricate, very introspective, all the rest of it, and then suddenly you bonk them on the head with a inflatable mallet of some description. And it is that thing of maybe using that as a gateway to that more intricate stuff, like almost like you mentioned before, like a full circle moment where they go like, so this, if this is what he's doing when he's trying to make me laugh, I wonder what he's doing when he's trying to make me think, and maybe rooting you back to that way. I mean, is that maybe something, a route progression that you could explore, do you think?
Definitely, 100%, bro. I'm all about subverting expectations, man. All about it. I'm a film guy like yourself, bro. I absolutely love film. I studied film in university. I'm a filmmaker at heart. So definitely finding ways to sort of shock people and take them by surprise, and deliver the type of poem or performance that's going to have them going, okay, wow, I didn't see that coming, is something that I always aspire to. And I once actually explored a way of doing that with a poem I wrote. It was about my brother. It wasn't gratitude, but it was about certain things he had experienced with prejudice. And the way I started that poem was actually comical. It was one of the very few times I've done it. And I remember the crowd were really laughing. And then when I made that transition into the more serious aspects of the poem, it changed. The crowd completely went quiet, not because they didn't like it anymore, but because they were shocked by that change. You know, like it went from this to this, and everybody was just sitting there and they were really listening and taking in what I had to say. So it's, yeah, I think it can be used as a way to sort of lead people back to what I am actually trying to achieve. And I think there's some things sort of going on, rolling around in my mind at the moment, churning, that could be a possibility that I could maybe explore. I won't go into it because obviously I want to leave that element of surprise. But yeah, man, I definitely like to write some more light-hearted content. So we'll see what happens, man.
Okay, super duper last question. I promise this really is the last question. What's the best thing about what you do? What's, for lack of a better phrase, the high? What's the moment that you, when you achieve it or it comes, you think, right, this is why I do what I do?
Easy, bro. It's when I have interactions with people that genuinely tell me that this piece of poetry has impacted them in a positive way. So whether that's because they've learned something new, or it's because it's inspired them in some way, or whether it's a young boy coming up to me when I was touring in Birmingham and saying, you're the best, you know, that for me, those are the moments I live for, man. Those are the moments where I sit back and go, yeah, this is why I do what I do. Because, and I know I don't want to sound like a broken record, because I have mentioned this before and I hate to reiterate, but I think it's important to emphasize what I'm saying. It's one thing to have people come up to you and say that you're sick. It's one thing to have people say that what you're doing is dope and you're going to be great because of this and that. But it's another thing for people to come up to you and say, wow, that left an impression on me that like nothing else. That left an impression on me that I didn't expect to have left on me by a poem. Those are the moments that make me go, okay, this is why I do what I do. And I've had the blessing of being able to enjoy that multiple times over the years. And one of the occasions that meant the most to me is that one I alluded to before with the young man in Birmingham. Because on that night, I was very new into my spoken word journey. And there were bigger stars on the day performing on the tour, right? There were people that had 20, 30,000, 40,000 followers on their Instagram. And this young boy came up to me and told me that I stood out to him. And he was no older than, 6, 7 years old. And I've kept that in here since that day. It meant the world to me. And I just don't believe there's any better feeling than that. You know what I'm saying? I think obviously the other thing that is up there in terms of that sort of feeling where you're just like, yeah, is also when your work gets recognized and appreciated. And TNT was that for me, because TNT gave me the opportunity to finally have my work appreciated in the way I said to you earlier, where I thought there's a lack of appreciation from like award bodies and things like that for the type of thing I do. And TNT, they really gave me the opportunity to showcase what I could do on a massive platform. And not only that, it's not just the fact that I got to perform, it's that they loved my poem so much that from the audition phase, and this is a story I'm sharing for the first time, but from the phase of where I did the video and I sent it in, I was, to my knowledge, one of the only poets that they came back and said, you're going to do write about the person that you actually auditioned to write about. And that was Muhammad Ali. So not only did I want to write about Muhammad Ali, but they said they wanted me to write about Muhammad Ali when I sent the tape in. And then not only did they say that, but they told me when I finalized the poem that they wanted my poem to be the last thing anybody saw. And that will always be an incredible feeling for me, because it's the one time I've truly felt that my work has been appreciated for being the type of work that it is, where I've not felt like it's kind of overlooked due to it not necessarily having that sort of more page poetry approach, where people have looked and said, okay, this is incredible work. And some people might say, oh, okay, what is TNT Sport? They're not a poetry award body. And yeah, that's absolutely fine. That's true, 100% fact. But it doesn't change the feeling of accomplishment that I had, because it was the one time where I got to truly, in front of a different type of audience, an audience filled with sporting legends, you know what I'm saying, share what I do on that level, on that stage. Yeah, nothing like that feeling, bro. Nothing like that. And those are the types of feelings I'd love to emulate and have more of down the line, you know, where I can be in these different environments, performing in front of the type of people that truly appreciate the work that I bring to the table. And they don't judge poetry based on a certain criteria that they've decided over the years is how things should be, because nowadays poetry shouldn't even rhyme in most academic circles, bro. You know what I'm saying? And that's absolutely fine. You know, I'm not judging that, but I'm just saying it limits the type of variation you're gonna see amongst poets if you're saying that it shouldn't rhyme and whatnot. You know, so for me to be able to do what I did on that sort of level, yeah, it's a blessing, and it's one that I cherish. I really do cherish it.
A great man once said, I often wonder what my neighbours think when they hear me practicing for a performance, and I'm remiss if I were to point out my neighbours must be wondering, what is he eating? Because I've spent that entire hour and a half just going, with my mic muted. That has been amazing. So there's only one thing left to ask, and it's the most important thing, because I know you've referenced it with regards to the release of Greener Pastures, which is, you're often asked how you can be supported. The question remains, how can people support you? Where can they follow you? Where can they find you? Is there anything you want them to be cognizant of? Obviously including, but not limited to, the Greener Pastures EP Deluxe Edition, which you can get right now at iamanotate.com.co.uk.
That's right,
I've got it here. .com right there. Is there anything else you want them to be cognizant of?
Yeah, definitely. Please do follow me on Instagram, of course, at annotate_. Follow me on YouTube as well, or rather subscribe to me on YouTube. I've got a body of video work on there, and that will be growing very soon. I've got some things in the pipeline, some videos, some of which I've never done before. I won't go into too much detail because, again, I want to leave that element of surprise, but I'm excited about some of the things I'm working on right now and some of the things to come. So please do subscribe. Of course, my newsletter, Master the Stage, sign up on my website. I'm going to be sharing inspiration and wisdom about performance, writing, spoken word, and so on and so forth. And this is something that can be benefited by any type of performer. It doesn't just have to be spoken word artists or poets, by the way. It can be actors, writers, rappers, whatever it may be. Just sign up, man, and you'll see what I'm talking about, because I'm telling you, there's going to be a lot of stories you can resonate and connect with. And of course, the EP, please do grab the EP, Greener Pastures, out now, deluxe edition, on my website, iamanotate.com. And yeah, just keep your eyes peeled, man. There are some stuff to come that I'm really excited about. I'll keep pushing with the content, man, trying to create as much content as I can so you guys see me as regularly as possible. But yeah, keep your eyes peeled, man.